Hi, Phil. It's great to see you again. So this is the second time we've done this sort of interview of senior leadership session as part of the senior leadership sessions. So thanks very much for popping in again. And I think it's a really good time as well with everything that's happening in the market, with all the movement and how, the people, these sort of big Ps are coming in, buying lots of products and consolidating in the market. I think it's a really good time to sort of get your opinions and your background as well, and what's been, what you had to go through with SIMS. And I suppose one of the first things I'll be really interested in is actually when you got bought by Capita, because it's really relevant now. There's lots of people being obviously bought. How did you feel? And what was the process like?
It was thorough. It's a very difficult decision to make. There were four of us that, in effect, owned SIMS, and I think I told you before that I was the only one that didn't really want to sell. The others, I think, were slightly older, and I think they felt that the revenues had peaked, and I think they thought they ought to bank what they'd achieved, which is fair enough. I didn't want to sell because I didn't really want to lose control of something which, frankly, I love doing. In actual fact, Capita, I thought, were very good as owners for a very, very long time. So the decision was made to sell. And of course, you then get into the difficulty of what will your customers' reaction to that sale be? Because we'd started, in effect, as four amateurs, rather. And I think our customers, particularly the local authorities, were concerned that a big company coming in would just cut costs and try and make profit that way. But in actual fact, that isn't the way that Capita works, or indeed many of other companies that I've seen work. They actually allow you to invest, and the intention is to actually make the business grow. And you can't do that just by purely cutting. That isn't to say that there aren't necessarily efficiencies to be made, which come from people with much more experience at running businesses. And I think that may be relevant to some of the purchases that have taken place. Investors buy because they expect growth. Some clearly do buy to make a cash cow, but I think with all the purchases I've seen over the last 6 months, that isn't what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people, serious investors, investigating and putting money up that they expect to get a good return on. So, that's really the background of the SIMS sale, and that was 1994. So it was quite a long time ago. Now, whether others were influenced in quite the same way that we were, it's very hard to say. But that's what certainly influenced us.
But do you think there's some points that are there sort of certain indicators within your business that says, right, this is the right time to now, to take that additional funding or be purchased, whichever way you want to look at it, but take investment. So do you think there's some key points, so Arbor at the moment now obviously merged with ScholarPack, do they think, right, the only way now to grow, exponentially is by, having greater levels of investment? Or like yourself, where you didn't necessarily want to, is it when you start saying, well, actually, the only way the business can go forward is by other ownership?
Yes, well, we were fortunate in that we didn't need other investment. Our revenues were very strong, which allowed us to invest a lot of money, actually, and Capita allowed that investment to continue. I think the Arbor ScholarPack combination is interesting because they've both got relatively small market share, 4.9, 6.4 for Arbor and ScholarPack. I'm pretty certain that Arbor hasn't been making any money. I'm pretty certain that the big investor in Arbor was also a big investor in ScholarPack. And I imagine that they must have been thinking, how can they save cost? Because they can't carry on losing money in the way that they have. And I think that it's an interesting strategy. I think it's quite a dangerous one in the sense of if you go back to what would the customer's reaction be, if I just bought ScholarPack, I would be worried that maybe Arbor is the one that will continue. If I just bought Arbor, I'd be worried that ScholarPack might be the one that continues. And if I was a potential buyer, I might be waiting until I see what happens. So there's no doubt in my mind they'll be combining back office and sales. They've given a commitment, I believe, that both products will continue, but that's a very expensive thing to do, particularly when you're going into the secondary market, as Arbor quite clearly is.
Yeah.
So I think there will be some interesting things happening in the not too distant future. Of course, just producing statutory returns is expensive. So even if you don't develop the product at all, you've still got to keep in step with the government requirements. And at the moment, they are changing quite rapidly, particularly in the way of attendance recording and things of that sort. So you'll definitely have to have a team that is on standby to do all that work. Otherwise, the product becomes redundant overnight. But
very true.
Yeah, it's an interesting development, and certainly I think the Arbor product is an attractive product. So I think you're right. It's the one that they will invest in.
Yeah, more so. But yeah, you're right. There will still need to be investment in things like statutory returns and any regulations in ScholarPack as well. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting time. But going back to the sort of global market piece, so so I've been saying this for a while. So my personal view at the moment is that all these MISs effectively are quite Me Too, and some of them are only just they may be nicer. Maybe nicer looking than Sim 7 at the moment. They might be easier to use than Sim 7 now, and all those aspects. But predominantly, most of the products, if you looked at a feature list or looked at the products, you'd probably say, yeah, reasonably Me Too. If you went into a tender process with a MAT or whatever, you went by feature, you go, yeah. Apart from the cloud bit, which I think it's a bit of a red herring sometimes, especially in secondary schools. But you look at the products and you say,
you get Google cutting out for half an hour. That's a fascinating development. AWS has done the same on a few occasions too. But
and you speak to many secondary schools; they already got servers anyway. The idea of putting, lots of the secondary schools I speak to don't see it as a major issue. They can identify ways of, teachers getting access outside the school quite easily.
I think that's true. I do think that at the moment there's a lot of selling on price. So there's a lot of lowering of expectations, which is making it quite difficult to survive in the market. It's quite interesting if you compare the price that a school pays for a full MIS with what a business would pay. There is just no comparison. And I think there's an awful lot of schools that think that freeware is actually the way they should go to save money. But of course, they don't get a comprehensive solution. The sort of pricing that is around at the moment, I think that is affecting innovation. You can't innovate unless you have got some very bright people, and they are expensive. Now, startups can do it because, the startup, you're probably a very bright person, you're probably highly talented, you can produce things that are innovative. But if you're a part of a bigger business, it's much harder to be innovative. Can't say the word, sorry. And you need money to invest. And at the moment, I don't think these companies have got the money to invest. Hence, you are seeing Me Too's. So the big disappointment for me is 8 not coming out, because I thought that had got some pretty good ideas in it that were different. But unless it gets released, that's irrelevant.
Well, it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy, if I can say that word or that sentence. Because ultimately, as soon as you get to a Me Too situation, you then start commoditizing the market because there's not enough differentiation, which means the only way to do it is drop your price to gain market share.
It becomes a commodity market, like you're buying electricity, so you can go onto a website and get your cheapest one. Yeah. And as they've all basically got the same way of working, this changeover won't be too hard. So yeah, I agree with your statement.
So I think so obviously even though I've said all these things and we've talked about the Me Too's and the commodities, but obviously the private equity firms are coming in and buying up. They're buying up the MISs, but they're also normally, so like the latest one with Montagu, it's not just the MIS, they're buying other products as well. So they're consolidating solutions. Juniper have done the same, where they bought up lots of the primary trackers. Do you see that as a trend? Do you think all the PEs will eventually have this box of tricks, tools
I do think that holistic solutions are the way it should go. That's how SIMS always was intended to be before we got competition concerns. But I do think it's the best solution for users. I think Juniper is a fascinating example of how to go about building a business. They've got some very bright people there, people that used to work at SIMS. They've bought relatively small companies with quite large footprints. So it's actually been quite cheap to buy some of these things. And Essex Target Tracker, that must have brought in 4,000 schools. SISRA, which I think is a really good product. I don't know how many customers it's got, but if you take SISRA and you take OTRAC between them, they've probably got half of the secondary schools. So they've already got, if you like, a footprint into more schools than any of the other competitors put together. And of course, they're buying going concerns. So they'll be making money. And I'm sure that behind the scenes, they will be deciding whether to bring everything together into a holistic offering, or whether they can just continue with those small products and grow market share. I think probably their customers will be quite pleased with the way things are going. So Pupil Asset, which is an adequate solution, but in a tiny percentage of schools, has got the opportunity now of expanding into a large number of schools, and it will be a trusted brand. So, yeah, interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting about Juniper, and it has echoes of early SIMS, and with Essex, they had a lot of advisory staff in there, and that's what we had at SIMS in the early days. But in the early days, it wasn't profitable, and we just couldn't keep it going. But today, with the academy market buying in services and local authority advisors being short on the ground, I think that probably is a good business. And of course, with the connection with the advisory service, I think they've got some excellent opportunities to input and shape the product and be fleet of foot. I think Juniper is one to watch for sure, even though at the moment, when the market comparisons are made, it comes down very low. But I think probably you need to assess the market in a slightly different way to the way that it is at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, isn't it? You can't just look at MIS anymore, because ultimately it's like you say, they've got the wraparound services. It's a little bit like actually where Arbor and ScholarPack can also be, because they've got the key, which again is in quite a large number of schools. And you can see where the MIS itself might not be actually the most important part of their overall delivery, which would be interesting, or it might just be at the center of their overall delivery. Is probably a better way of looking at it.
And if you actually look at the prices that schools pay for some of these add-on products, they dwarf what they pay for SIMS. So I suspect Juniper is doing quite nicely.
Yeah, and I think they're doing things. It's interesting because they're doing it quite quietly. I think in some ways, obviously they're advertising and marketing, but they're doing it quite quietly. And I agree with you. I think they're almost getting their primary solution spot on and what they're going to offer the primary school sector. And now they're starting to look at the secondary sector. And, I think they're definitely one to watch. It'd be interesting to see what they do in 2021 for sure.